Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Stephen King's Riding the Bullet. So, if anything, somebody might have somewhere caught my original review of this movie. And I think when I reviewed that originally, I kind of went for the mentality of, I don't think that this video is going to do well. So, I kind of phoned that review in all honesty. But this time around, I had rewatched the movie and am going into this review with the best intentions, because also with having a much more exclusive channel with just reviews, and also just really trying to put my best foot forward for this channel, I really wanted to come back here and redo this and maybe quite possibly have people eventually want more Stephen King stuff. I know, the show The Stand is out there. I know eventually there is going to be a lot of people that love certain Stephen King movies, maybe like The Shinings. How many numerous ones have they done of those? But let's get into Stephen King's Riding the Bullet. So, this is actually a very much more interesting film than I realized. Going into this film, it's not just about a guy having a birthday and deciding to go in a tub and take a razor blade to his wrist. No, that's how severely dark this movie gets. And some people may not know that. So, really, this movie has, from time to time, this guy talking to himself as if this guy has a clone version of himself and he is talking to it. No one else sees this person because a lot of times we have the main character, Alan Parker, who is to eventually talk to either himself or to talk to spirits, dead things, or really there's a lot of points in time in this movie that we are not quite sure whether to believe that something is really and truly there, or it is some kind of hallucination or imaginary thing that Alan is seeing at that time, as if he is being haunted by any number of things that are to appear into frame at some point. We have Alan from time to time talking to the Grim Reaper, talking to eventually drivers of a car that are probably dead or are going to die, or any number of things. And so that story is kind of really fascinating. Here also, we also have a 2004 movie that is supposed to be a time period piece, but it honestly feels blatantly obvious that this movie is trying to be a certain time period piece, but honestly, for the most part, it kind of fails miserably on trying to do that. You can kind of tell this is a certain time period failing at being a past time period, and because really all that you can tell that this is a past time period piece is really by the references that they deliver. But here is the best thing that I love about this film. So, I reviewed this film called Death Sentence, and it was a Kevin Bacon film. And the very beginning of that movie, we end up having these home video things going on of the family for you to invest in them. And that's the thing that I loved about that the most. Where in this movie, we kind of have the exact same thing, where we are to show both Alan and Mother Jean having this homemade video of this scenario that eventually just gets replayed and reused later down the film. Which I'm okay, I liked that kind of homemade feel, but, it's basically a scene that gets reused later. it kind of feels like there is some scenes in this movie that kind of get reused later. And like that is probably the most annoying one. But anyways, um going into this film, I didn't realize how many several amounts of actual like unclothed women there were in this movie, because we have this guy who I guess paints unclothed women onto his wall, and so there's that. And but also we have the very beginning of this movie, where we have Alan who is painting a woman while he's in class. And that woman, of course, like he modifies the painting to look very dark and very grim or whatever because he's the Prince of Darkness. Like that's a thing that I do actually like about this film. I don't know what is with me and like supernatural stuff where everything has to be dark and grim and whichever. Like, but really, like, I don't know, I just kind of cling to that kind of theme a lot easier than I would like the normal, like, happy rainbow sunshine, like, movie and or show. Like, if anything, I think kind of Sweet Tooth is trying to, like me watching that right now is kind of beating that out of me. But I always will try to like stay to like the ghost stories and the supernatural ish like things in horror films just because I just enjoy them. And plus, also I've very much grown a tolerance for a certain kind of films through horror, so it's just kind of like fun to kind of like finally be able to like, oh yeah, I watched this movie finally, and man was it ugly, man was it awful, man was it whatever. But I didn't feel that way for this film. I thought that there are some obvious points in time in this film where you're kind of like, because the story, but it's just because it's adapted from a book and it's a time period piece that can't really connect to that. And so, really, I thought that this movie was good enough, even though a lot of people could be like, yeah, this movie's weird. This movie's weird. Plus, also, it consistently brings up, if anybody doesn't realize what riding the bullet is, riding the bullet is actually a roller coaster called the Bullet, and this kid is eventually realizing that he has to face his fears, because really this is what this whole journey is all about, is really Alan facing his fear, facing down the fact that he chickened out through portions of his life, let's just say cryptically. And so now he has to come to terms with that, and realize that he has to make decisions. And I think that also all those decisions that eventually he makes during this journey, during this ride, eventually gets him to eventually be a different person towards the end of this movie. But with Alan, there isn't a clear-cut happy ending. Like, it could feel like there's a happy ending, but like there isn't like a 100% like happy ending out of this whole entire thing. Like, we do have Alan that is happy at the end of this movie, but that doesn't mean that there is a happy ending 100%, because like there's some stuff that it seemed that it was going to work out. Yeah, but anyways, let's get into the spoilers of this film, because yeah, I've already been talking about this for 10 minutes. So let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time I'm going to spoil this movie. So we are to have Alan be reminded that today is his birthday, Yay, Alan! It's your birthday. Thank goodness for you. I don't like stories that have to go into either like, hey, you're the new kid in school, or like it's a special holiday, something like to just kind of like put in like some kind of holiday so people have to give gifts to the main character or like some kind of goofy thing like that. But anyways, we have Alan who is to eventually go to class to go and let's just say paint a woman with no clothes on. And so he is to draw slash paint her, and eventually it seems that he has a modified way of seeing this person. This woman, Alan is to draw her with a reaper behind her, and she has become kind of very zombified. And so we end up having Alan's teacher, who is Mr. Clarkson, who is to mention to uh, Alan, you know what? Like, why does everything have to be so grim with you? Like, why does every day have to be Halloween with you? Like, can't you just like have something be a little bit happier, a little bit brighter? Like, why does everything have to be so morbid? And so, like, to me, I'm like, well, like, I'm seeing the way. Like, if anything, like, why does everything have to be so sunshiny and happy? Why does every movie have to have a clear, happy ending? Not every movie has to be perfect, and sometimes, quite often through horror films, you end up having a movie that doesn't end happily ever after. A lot of times, the good guy loses, and a lot of times, the good guy gets killed at the end. Um, I honestly like uh, movies that have the good guy or whichever lose at the end, just because then I'm like, oh, okay, so like this either gives for a completely different person to be put into the sequel movie, or it gets to where you have just kind of an interesting ending than normal ways of like, oh, well, this person, of course, had to survive because sequel, because they're setting it up for a sequel, and so this person has to survive to tell the new batch of kids, hey, yeah, you're gonna suck at this, but like I'm gonna keep trying to tell you how exactly to go through this whole thing, and you guys aren't gonna listen, obviously, because I've been through this before, and so on and so forth. So pushing on. So we are to have Alan, who is to seemingly have him and his girlfriend Jessica, while they were in class, it seems that Jessica's like, you know what? Like, I don't know about us. Like, you know what? I think that we should just, like, I think we should just call it quits. I think we should just try and, like, see other people kind of thing. And, and Alan's like, seriously? You're breaking up with me on my birthday? And Jessica's like, well, how about you just not see it like that? Like, how about we just, like, see where other things can go? Like, let's just, like, have a break for a little bit. Like, let's catch a breath. So, we eventually have Alan talking to himself and really, like, kind of like thinking about how really he is with her, and how like Jessica will probably never accept Alan just because of how like creepy he is. And so we push on. So Alan is to eventually go into his tub to eventually go and look at his razor, because of kind of all the things like wounding up in his head. We eventually have Alan who takes the razor blade out of his razor to get close to taking his razor to his arm. We have the Grim Reaper who pops into Alan's bathroom and is like, "Do it, Alan, do it!" nobody really loves you. Do it. And so Alan is to not really go and do it. But then eventually Jessica is to open the door of this bathroom to yell surprise because they had a surprise birthday party for Alan, and Alan is not going to be able to do said birthday party because he accidentally cut his wrist while while surprise birthday party was happening. And so we have Alan who is to now go to the hospital to try to sew up his wrist. And we have Jessica who is at this hospital like man, I guess you took it really hard that like I was going to break up with you. And like Alan is trying to push it off, is like, no, like it was really just a mistake. Like really, it was just a mistake. And so Jessica is like, well, like, are you sure? Because, like, that was, like, a horrible thing that you did. It was such a selfish and horrible thing that you did, Alan. Alan, you're a horrible person, and you're selfish, and, like, all that jazz. Yeah, whatever. So, anyways, we push on. We have Jessica who's like, well, like, I guess since you're here, I'll give you your birthday present. And so she gives Alan a envelope, and so he opens it and realizes that there are some tickets to go to a Beatles concert, really showing that this movie was done in a certain time period when John Lennon was still alive, when George Harris was still alive. But then towards the end of the movie, they have to kind of showcase that, like, yeah, John Lennon did die, George Harrison did pass away. And so, like, this is kind of timelining exactly when this is all gonna break down and whatever. So this is kind of even like the timeline of this movie is like conflicting with the even like post whatever more current time that is like. So like this is timeline within a timeline because we're past this timeline because certain years and whatever what have you within this movie, but it is what it is. So we have Alan who is thinking about having both of his friends both go with him to this concert. And so we have Alan who is, and here's the funny part that goes into this movie, the repetitious times where they are to break in and have Alan think numerous scenarios are going to happen to him. Like we end up having one time where Alan is to go through this hospital and one doctor is to say like, well, yeah, like this person's effed and you're effed and and let's move on. And so and I'm busted out laughing at this point. I'm like, oh my god, like I guess that doctor is like the goofy take doctor, to where really that take is not going to make the final cut, but it's just something goofy to put in the movie. And plus, it's also like the inner thinking of Alan, to where like anything could happen, anything that these doctors say could happen, and whichever and what have you. But pushing on, so we have Alan who is picking up the phone, and we have at first Jessica mentioning that like, you know what, Alan, it was a stupid silly thing for us to break up. How about you and me just run away together? And of course that is not the real true legitimate phone call that Alan is getting, so that's straw number one. And so we end up having Alan repetitiously picking up this phone to get different things. But eventually the real scenario is that Alan is to pick up the phone from a friend of his mother to tell him that his mother had a heart attack. And so Alan is to mention, it's like, well, like, well, then I guess I'll see her at the hospital, like, tonight. Like, I'll try to make my way there. Because really, this woman is asking, like, well, are you going to see her soon? How about Saturday? And it's like, well, he was going to go into a concert, but, like, his mother having a heart attack is much more of a priority than him going to a concert. So, we have Alan who gives the tickets to his friends. His tickets, like, his friends are to drive off. And so Alan is to basically just hitchhike his way to his mother's hospital. I'm like, you would have thought that his friends would have been like, you know what, that sucks, man. Like, how about we just drive you up there because we're nice friends? Like, Bashal, this whole ticket thing, maybe Jessica can get it reimbursed, or maybe she could sell them off to somebody, or maybe Jessica could find somebody to go with because it's the freaking Beatles. But it is what it is. So, and plus, like, Alan regifting that might have been like a crappy thing to do, but Alan could have just said, like, well, yeah, but you know what? Like, my mom's having a heart attack, so I think it's a little bit more important than these concert tickets, as good as these concert tickets are. Like, it's interesting when Alan and his friends are kind of talking about, like, this whole concert and how great it could be. Like, I think at first it is like a John Lennon concert, but one of his friends were like, well, yeah, but what if, like, all the other Beatles just all of a sudden just surprisingly come to this one concert and just play their old tunes? I'm like, yeah, I don't think so. So we push on. So we have Alan who is thumbing it his way to the concert. And so we also have these like flashbacks of Alan who wanted to go on the Bullet, desperately wanting to go on to the Bullet in the very beginning of this movie. And once he gets on the line and once he gets to the actual being able to ride the Bullet thing, Alan is to chicken out. And so his mother is to just wail on him, just beat the crap out of him in front of everybody. She's really like busting out the whip and this and all kinds of things. She's shoving her boot up his butt and all kinds of stuff, all kinds of craziness. People are going wild. People are chanting "woo, woo, woo, keep going." No, like really, all she does is just like slap him over the head, and then they walk out. Like none of that other stuff happened, but it was actually funny, right? So we push on. So we have Alan who is thumbing it his way to a Incredible Hulk theme song. Yeah, like we're Incredible Hulking it out, and so we have this man thumbing it. So the very first person that is to pick him up is some guy in a hippie car that I think has got to be the weirdest introductional character of this hitchhiking road like thing. Because when really looking at it, like this guy just kind of like didn't like check all the wind columns of being this first like driver guy. It just feels like honestly this character like they didn't know what to do with this person. So they're just like do this with this guy. Because here's the thing. So we have this hippy dippy guy who is called Ferris. There's a reason for that. So there's a reason we find his name somewhere in this car. So we have Fenris or Ferris who is to talk to Alan, and we have Alan's enter him that is basically like, dude, I don't trust this guy. Like he seems kind of hippy dippy. Like he seems like he smoked too many bongs or something. Like we should probably just get out of the car and just walk our way to this spot. And so we have Alan consistently talking to Ferris, and so Ferris is asking, like Alan all these like cliche-ish hippie things, like, "Hey man, did you go to Woodstock?" And and Alan is like, no, and Ferris is asking him like, hey, did you join the military? And Alan is like, no, like, did you join the military? And Ferris is like, no, man, they tried to draft me in Nam, but I dodged that. But then eventually, we end up all of a sudden having, eventually, I think, Ferris's car, like, brakes too quickly, and then all of a sudden you see this army, like, duffel bag, and then Ferris is like, well, what the heck is that? And so we all of a sudden see, Ferris has a wig on, and Alan sees that, and he's like, okay, you have a military bag, and you have a wig on. Like, what is up with you, buddy? And so we immediately have Alan who's like, dude, I am gonna get out of here. Like, good luck with your travels there, whoever you say you really are. Go on your way, I'm gonna go and get somebody else. Like, and so we have Alan who is to end up getting out of the car. So we have Alan who is to eventually go and continue walking and trying to thumb it. So we Hulk it out again. So we have Alan who is to eventually go into a number of horrible scenarios. So we have Alan who is to eventually see a bunny, and he ends up jumping because of that. And he's like, oh, you putty. And so we have Alan who eventually sees a dog who grabs this rabbit. And then eventually we have Alan who is kind of neck deep in because this dog looks very vicious. And so this dog goes and attacks Alan and goes and just starts ripping his throat out, killing him, and all kinds of horrible things. And this movie ends, credits roll, and wow, was that a quick review. Nah, we find out that Alan is imagining all this, and what a horrible scene that whole thing played out to be. And so we have Alan consistently thumbing it Hulk style, and so we eventually have one hillbilly truck that is to call, I think Alan like some kind of, like he calls him like a gay guy or something, and we have Alan's like, well, F you, buddy! And so we have this truck that backs up and starts chasing after Alan. Alan goes and runs into this like junkyardish like section of this woods that has all these kinds of old looking rusted appliances, and so Alan hides into this refrigerator. And so eventually these hillbillies all drive off, or both these hillbillies just drive off, and so Alan gets out of this fridge, and so he continues on the road thumbing it Hulk style. So we eventually have somebody who is to stop for Alan, and that is to be just Farmer. Evidently his name is just Farmer. And so this Farmer, a lot of people might know as the original Uncle Ben from the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies. But also, this guy is to be known also in this movie as the guy who is grabbing his junk too much. He's going like, yeah, I'm really grabbing my junk, cause, yeah, like that, like something's like, really happening, And so, we have Alan talking to Alan 2, let's just say, as his imaginary self. And so we have Alan who's talking to Alan 2, and Alan 2 mentions like, man, I think we could have been better, like, being on the road. Like, can't you see that this guy's sick? And so, but Alan is talking to this old man to kind of see, like, how, like, functional he is. As he's going, I'm grabbing I gotta continue to grab at my junk, cause I have to. Cause I have to pee, I guess. Or something else. I don't know. That flare up. So we have Alan that is going through this journey with grabbing man. And so we have grabbing man who is to talk about that he had a wife who had Alzheimer's, and eventually she completely forgot who he was. And so we have a farmer who is just kind of mentioning what like Alan is doing and how nice that is. That eventually he's going out of his way to get to his mom and all kinds of nice things, and eventually we just get to a point where Alan is like, you know what, like this guy is grabbing at his junk way too often, and more than likely, like this guy is also starting to swerve with his car, and Alan is kind of worried that eventually this guy is going to cause a car accident because he's swerving in and out with his car. And so we eventually have Alan who's like, you know what, like, I think that this is quite possibly far enough there, farmer. Like, I hope you have a great day, and I hope everything goes fine with you, but I'm gonna get out of here. And we end up having this farmer bizarrely, like, finishing off this conversation with, I think, going back into the same thing that he talked about, where his, like, he started talking about his wife bizarrely again. And like Alan is like, you know what, that's okay, goodbye. So we also have at some point where Alan is imagining when he is to get to the hospital what his mother is going to be like. That, like, Alan could go to the hospital and Jean, his mother, could be making all kinds of weird, bizarre animal sounds repetitively, and say, like, well, yeah, this is your mother now, son. Like, you're gonna have to just deal with this. And so, like, we have Alan who's getting all kinds of wild imaginations of all the stuff that he's going to be mixed into when eventually he gets to the hospital. So, plus also remembering the bullet and just kind of remembering that he chickened out. So, because the bullet thing just keeps popping up throughout this movie, it's not really understood, but it is what it is. So, we are to have Alan, who is to arrive at Ghost of Future Past. Or future present? I don't know. The last car that that Alan is supposed to arrive in, because Alan is assuming that every single one of these cars of these people are quite possibly all drivers who were actually dead, and they're all kind of going around here and driving Alan along to these spots, but they're actually all dead. These people are all zombies who are all just bizarrely getting to give Alan his one last ride, and eventually someone will come a calling for him. So before Alan is to get his one last ride, his one last journey, we have Alan who is to go to some graveyard to eventually see a grave called George Staub. And so we have Alan who's like, okay, so I'm seeing this grave. And then all of a sudden, at the bottom of the grave, it says, what's fun is fun and done is done. And that actually was the saying, I guess, of his mother. And so we have Alan who's kind of freaking out because he's like, oh my god, is that what's going to happen? Is that my mother is going to die and that's the quote that's going to be on her gravestone? And eventually we have Alan, who is emerging out of his own grave to just be like, yeah, like we picked a spot for you there, buddy. Like basically saying that Alan is quite possibly going to die in this road trip. So we have Alan who is thumbing his way, again, Hulk style, through the streets of wherever this is. I want to say Calcutta because that's the random location that I see for every single movie. Even if it wasn't done in Calcutta, that's the joke that I always like to do. So I'm going to keep on rolling with it. So we have Hulk style through Calcutta. So we have Alan who is to see a nice red, pristine looking car. Here's also the thing. We end up having also, through parts of this journey, we are to see Alan eventually see his father. But his father is some kind of ghost that quickly disappears. I think at some point there was some car accident or police officer thing going through here, because eventually they have like a ambulance that kind of drives through this location, but I'm not sure like exactly what the connection of all that is. But let's move on. So the very last, because I'm not trying to waste. I'm not trying to I'm trying to remember things, but also there's a lot going on in this movie. There's a bunch of jumbled mess of stuff going on in this film. So let's get to the Arquette moment. So we have Alan who is thumbing it, and there is a nice red, pristine, almost looking car. Alan goes in, knowing full well that this is going to be his worst nightmare quite possibly ever happening. And so we have Alan who is to talk to, of course, David Arquette, who is actually George Staub. And we have Alan who remembers that this guy is to be dead in a gravestone somewhere, or in a grave somewhere. And so Alan immediately asks, like, why is this guy wearing a hat? And so all of a sudden we have Alan who takes off George's hat to realize there is no hairline anywhere on the top. It's just brain. And so George is like, ah! And so, like, all of a sudden blood is gushing, and they're like, okay. And so we get that bizarre-ish moment. And so we eventually have Alan who is talking to George. And so every single time George is asking Alan questions, Alan too is telling Alan to lie, to make up something. And so we have George asking Alan what his name is, and Alan is to say Hector. And George is like, yeah, like you must be a person that got like crap for that name for I don't know how many years, I guess, when you were in school. And Hector's like, So we have George who's asking Hector, now Hector guy, like, hey, what are you going for? Where are you going? And so Hector is to mention that he's going to a wedding, which isn't true. So we have George who's going like, wow, you're going there to a wedding? Wow, that's great. And so we eventually have Hector kind of talking more, and how if anything, like a lot of people should probably have a wedding at least twice, right? And George is like, yeah, I guess that's a good way to think about it. Like, me and my family have had a lot of like multiple marriages, and like Hector's like, yeah, same here. So, but yeah, eventually Hector slips and says like, well, yeah, like eventually I guess it's always great to have like a funeral. And so George is like, wait a minute, didn't you just say wedding? And Hector's like, oh, well, yeah, I meant wedding, and like, but you said funeral. And so there's this huge whole slip up, but eventually we have George, who ends up calling Hector Alan, which is his actual name. And so we have Alan too, who's mentioning to Alan, like, hey, don't acknowledge that he called you Alan and just play it off. And so we eventually have George that is pushing at Alan, just like, well, yeah, like, hey, like, I know that there's this ride here called the Bullet. Like, did you ever ride the Bullet? And Alan, who is still Hector, says, oh, no, like, oh, yeah, I rode the Bullet once, and, yeah, I did it. And so George is like, well, yeah, I rode the thing 4 times. Like, I got a badge that says that I rode it. And so eventually I wanted to give this badge to my, it wasn't a badge, it was like a pin or something, to my girlfriend, but that never actually happened. And Alan, you'll know why. So, because George mentions to Alan, like, dude, you never went on the Bullet. You chickened out. You and your mother were supposed to go on the Bullet. Like, you were waiting numerous hours in the pouring down rain. And because obviously there wasn't a pouring down rain situation in that setting, but still. You were waiting for numerous hours for this Bullet ride, and immediately once you got to the spot where you were to get on the ride, you chickened out because of how high the ride was. And so Alan is kind of freaking out at this moment because George is correct. Plus, also, we are to see what had happened to George. So, George was to be driving along, I guess, to give this pen to his girlfriend, and we eventually had George, who was to get into an accident and literally lose his head, to where his head is in the back seat of his car. And we have one thing that happens here. We had David, who, before he is to talk, his head is to obviously shift while in this back of this car. And so that's not David's fault. Like, really, it could have been easily the editor that could have just either one edited that out, or two, they could have, like, instead of just really longly stretching this scene out, they could have just really just went right into the head spot and had him say his line and be done with this. So we eventually realize that now George is now dead, riding Alan to his supposedly last ride to make it to this hospital. And so we have George, who is now telling Alan, he's like, yeah, I know you're making it to get to your mother, and so you're going to have to make a decision whether you live or she does. Like, I have to take either one of you, and so now you have to choose which one lives, you or your mother. And so we have Alan that now has to choose between him and his mother, and he decides to jump out of this car and rip off the skin of George and the skin of his hand off. And so Alan is to eventually be at the stop of this amusement park, where he is to go through this amusement park, see certain rides, but eventually he is to clearly end up back at the Bullet, and he is to ride this Bullet. But when Alan is done with this ride, eventually this is all to lead back to one, Alan speaking to his mother and having her very remorseful about what had happened in the past. But we eventually have Alan notice that this mother of his, her arm is bizarrely hurting. And we find out instead that this is actually George. And George is like, well, yeah, of course my arm's hurting, Alan, because you ripped the skin off. So we eventually have we eventually have George, who forces Alan back into his car to make the decision about whether Alan is to live or his mother is to live. And so eventually we have Alan, who decides to choose his mother because his mother has poor health, and Alan is like, I think, 21, and so he has everything ahead of him. And so, which I think that decision kind of becomes fairly interesting, because Alan is to realize that before he was willing to take his own life, but now he's deciding that he wants to live. He wants to see what is to happen for his future, and that is to change his mind going forward about what he wants to do with his life, which is really interesting. So this is kind of like a Scrooge kind of moment, but it's also kind of like a It's a Wonderful Life kind of thing, where this guy is to be scared straight into wanting to have a better life. So we eventually have Alan, who is to eventually go to this hospital after this decision had been made. And so we have Alan, who is to see his mother. And so the nurse is saying, like, well, you know what, this is after hours, but hey, go on and go up. So we have Alan, who is going to the elevator, seeing that George is also in another elevator, like, hey, I'll see your mom. Like, I'll see your mom, like, haha, toodles. So we have Alan, who's now scrambling to get in the elevator, hoping he can run to get there before George does. And so we have Alan, who scrambles into his mother's room, and George is not there, but the nurse mentions to Alan that's like, hey, like, we gave your mother a sedative, so she might be fairly soupy. Go ahead and check her out and just kind of like see what you can get out of her. So we have Alan talking to his mother, and so we are to assume that this is probably going to be the last time he is going to talk to her. So we have Alan, who is talking to his mother, and so Jean is to tell Alan that, like, you know what, like, I remember the time that we went to the amusement park and we waited so long to get onto that ride called the Bullet, and, like, you never went on that ride. Like, it's so sad that you never actually were ever to get the courage to go on that ride. And so Alan is like, well, you know what, that's fine, Ma, because eventually he went on the ride anyways and conquered his fear. But so we are to really just do like a time lapsing like thing after this. So we have it to where Alan's mother didn't die with his hospital visit. It seems that she went on to go and be with Alan. It seems like Alan moved back in with his mother, and eventually, like, she just kept on smoking, and eventually she eventually died in their home, but it wasn't like right after that moment. So we have Alan, who eventually did marry Jessica, but it just didn't work. So it's not like a complete happy ending. So we eventually have Alan, who continues to paint even though he doesn't really make any real true money out of it. It's just a fun hobby that he has consistently done. And so we have Alan, who eventually is to eventually let the decades pass and eventually realize that John had died, and so did George Harris from the Beatles. And so we eventually have Alan mentioning, it's like, well, you know what, like, maybe life didn't turn out exactly like I wanted, but every single year I always get to ride that bullet. And so, like, really, that's got to be the consolation prize out of all of this. Is that eventually, like, Alan could go back to that moment where he went on the bullet and eventually rode that bullet with a number of his family and friends, with that kind of thought process in his head. Alan, Alan was also to find out, speaking of his father, Alan was to find out that Alan's father did not die in a car accident. Alan's father actually took his own life via a gun. Like, bizarrely, we have one moment in this movie where Alan's father is to retake his own life again in this car, the part of this movie. And I thought that was kind of like an ill taste kind of thing. Like, was it to be made as a joke? Was it to be made as just like a crazy moment in this movie? I'm not quite sure where they were going with Alan's father retaking his life in this car. I guess to try to be like a Willy Wonka crazy moment within this movie, to where Alan was just going so crazily bonkers in this car, and really David Arquette was pushing Alan or George was pushing Alan so far into insanity with his whole decision. So, with that said, I think I covered most of this movie, but there might have been something that slipped in the cracks. But I also want to get out of here, so goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.